Welcome back to our channel. Hope you all are doing well. In today's video, we will find out top 10 people who survived nightmare situations. So, let's start the video. Number 10. Timothy Brown. When Timothy Brown was diagnosed with HIV in 1995, antiretroviral treatments might still prolong life, but not forever. Brown reacted well to therapy, but was diagnosed with leukemia in 2005. During the second round of chemotherapy, he had pneumonia. During the third, he developed sepsis, and his physicians understood that treatment was going to kill him. That's when Dr. Jiro Hutter decided to try a new treatment. He gave Brown a stem cell transplant to cure his leukemia, but he picked a donor with a rare genetic condition that renders cells immune to HIV. The transplant not only worked, but it also treated the leukemia and HIV. Number 9. Jake Finkbeiner. Survived flesh-eating bacterial infection. In February 2006, 5-year-old Jake Finkbeiner played in the season-ending Pee Wee League basketball game. That game, he was shoved from behind and split his lip on the basketball hoop. The surface of this base harbored a fatal surprise, the bacterium Strep A. And within days, Jake's astonished parents were listening to specialists inform them their kid was likely to die. Strep A is a flesh-eating bacterium that entered Jake's mouth via an untreated wound and started consuming his face, like burning one end of a parchment paper, and seeing it spread from one corner very quickly, and stamping on one side, and it flaring up on another, as though you could see it moving right before your eyes. To celebrate Jake's life, his family prayed to bless Kateri Tekakwitha, a Mohawk Indian who converted to Catholicism. Jake is half Lummi Indian. The illness slowed, then halted. Flesh-eating bacterial infections do not usually diminish on their own until a patient is deceased. Number 8. Paul Lessard. Survived, being trapped for 20 hours in Freezing Creek. To 64-year-old Paul Lessard, it must have seemed as if circumstances colluded to ensure he would not survive his ordeal. His head was trapped behind the hefty storage rack, making it impossible to move unless he wanted to break his neck. It was frigid even though it was mid-afternoon, and his body was partially submerged in a freezing brook. Then the sunset and the temperature started to play a role in Paul's survival. He was reported missing at 8:30 that night, but the search was hampered by strong snow and wind, which Paul had to endure. The wind cold dropped to roughly 0 degrees, and the search operation continued at daylight with more men and an aircraft. The owner of a local Arctic cat store and his son found the overturned snowmobile. Just before 8 a.m., Paul had spent nearly 20 hours locked in these hazardous circumstances, imprisoned by his head, and had hypothermia and frostbite, yet he recovered fully. Number 7. Bahia Bakari. Survived plane crash into Indian Ocean, sole survivor. Come back after seeing the first half of the film, Cast Away, and we'll talk about it again. It's hard to imagine anything worse, and just one 14-year-old French girl survived, while 152 others did not. Eumenia Flight 626 and A310 crashed into the Indian Ocean at 2 a.m. on June 30, 2009. Bahia Bakari was thrown from the aircraft and managed to remain afloat by clinging to a piece of fuselage debris. She would later report that she could hear other survivors' voices in the turmoil following the accident, but that they had all faded away. A civilian vessel tasked with searching for survivors found her about 11 a.m., 9 hours after the collision. The search effort only found Bahia. Her mother was among the dead. She was hospitalized for 3 weeks with a shattered pelvis and collarbone. Number 6. Felix. Survived kidnapping, torture by Mexican drug cartel. The Mexican drug cartel's actions are distinguished by a callous disregard for human life. Scores of innocents have been killed in clashes between the Zeta and Gulf cartels, including journalists, bloggers, police, and migrants. Many cops help the cartels rather than face execution, and there is no law except the cartels in many regions of Mexico. A 20-year-old guy named Felix was picked up by a police officer while wandering alone one night in one of these areas, starting a long and painful nightmare. The police left Felix to a Zeta cartel safe house where he was assaulted, pistol-whipped, and shocked for a week while his family was called for ransom. Kidnappers tortured Gulf cartel members to death in front of him, telling him he would suffer their fate if his family couldn't cobble up $5,000. He was moved around to a dozen safe homes, sharing cramped, hot rooms with scores of other detainees for a few months. Felix was beaten to a pulp and thrown on the street, assuming no more money would come. His recuperation took months, but he survived, unlike so many others who vanish from the Mexican streets. Number 5. Richard Moyer. Survived black bear attack in his home. On October 3, 2011, Richard Moyer awoke as usual. He got up to let his dog Brindy out, but as he turned to walk back inside, Brindy appeared, hasty and unexpected. A huge black bear pursues her. This bear despised Brindy and anybody associated with her. It rushed inside the home after the dog, assaulting Richard and waking up Angela. She attempted to halt the bear assault, but the beast turned on her. "What are you going to do?" Richard Moyer said, his dog leaping into the aggressive beast. "I simply jumped into the bear. Head down," he added. That's when the bear went insane. Incredibly, it stopped mauling him and calmly sat on the front porch. The bear's claws caused severe damage, but the chew job on Richard's skull took 37 staples to seal. By day's end, both husband and wife returned home from the hospital, ready to tell their 10-year-old son the incident. Number 4. Ken Henderson survived, being stranded at sea after boat sank. In March 2012, Ken Henderson and Ed Cohen's 30-foot boat began to fill with water while fishing in the Gulf of Mexico. Henderson attempted to pump some water out, but salt water blasted everywhere, ruining the pumps. After gathering some life jackets and provisions, the boat sank under them into the icy ocean. They stayed for about 30 hours. They gathered close to save body heat, fighting tiredness, thirst, and the terrible cold. When it became clear that Cohen, a slim guy, was in difficulty, Henderson opted to swim alone to a distant oil rig. Ken nearly died. He grew bewildered, nearly lost his way, and started seeing ice trees floating in the lake. Ken found a phone in a galley and called his wife, who contacted the Coast Guard. But there would have been 2 corpses to unearth if Ken Henderson hadn't put in the effort. Number 3. Alcides Moreno survived 47-story fall from apartment building. 47-story apartment building collapse survivor Alcides and Edgar Moreno were window washers who worked on Manhattan high-rises for years. In December 2007, the rig they were working on disengaged and dropped 47 floors, nearly 500 feet, into an alleyway. When firefighters came, they found Edgar dead and Alcides conscious and sitting up. Injuries to the head and pelvis are the most frequent causes of death in such falls, yet Alcides did not suffer either. There were no visible signs of life in Alcides that day, save for a lack of a pulse. Doctors anticipated him to be out of operation for a year or more, yet he was back on the morning talk shows by June. Astonishingly, Alcides' days as a window washer are finished. Above 10 stories, most of the time we never see the patients, said Moreno's main doctor, because they generally go to the morgue. Number 2. Holly Dunn survived, attacked by railway killer, sole survivor. When an odd-looking guy approached Holly Dunn and her boyfriend Chris May or late on the night of August 29, 1997, they were apprehensive. Angel Resendiz has already slain 6 people and planned to kill many more. Resendiz discovered the pair speaking by the tracks, a few streets from a party. He used an ice pick to tie Holly and Chris up in a ditch, then returned to hammer Chris to death with a 50-pound boulder. Holly was then raped, stabbed in the neck with an ice pick, and beaten until she passed out. Holly dragged herself to the closest home, where she was rushed to the hospital with a broken eye socket, a broken jaw, among other injuries. She recovered and testified against Resendiz at his trial, where he was convicted and sentenced to death in 2006. Angel Resendiz, the railway killer, killed at least 15 people over 13 years, only Holly Dunn surviving. Number 1. Michelina Lunska survived, being buried alive. Michelina Lunska, a Polish emigrant to the UK, recalled her anguish as she lay buried in the dirt, her hands and feet tied, in a taped-up cardboard box, slowly suffocating. "I begged to God for aid so I could care for my son." The referred to her then 3-year-old son she shared with fiancé Marcin Kasprzak, the man who had buried her. Bored with Michelina, Kasprzak and Patrick Boris devised a scheme to get rid of her. Marcin used a stun gun twice on her, once to knock her down and once to hold her for a long time, before tying her up and driving out into the forest, where they'd buried her alive beneath 4 inches of soil and a 90-pound tree limb. Michelina used her engagement ring to break her shackles and claw her way out of the small grave. She had difficulties walking and breathing for weeks following the incident, and she undoubtedly now has nightmares. But her assailants were both sentenced to 20 years in jail based on her evidence. With this, I'm wrapping up this video. We will see you soon in our next video. Until then, take care, goodbye.